Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello, everyone. Tracy here. Welcome back to another episode. I am so thankful to have you joining me for another fantastic conversation. But before we dive right in, a quick word from this week's sponsor.
The future of Canadian food is strong, and FCC is ready to help the next generation of innovators like you with financing tailored to your needs and resources to help you keep growing. To get started, visit fcc.ca/youngfarmer.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. I am so excited to have Garrett Ruskamp joining me. Garrett, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Tracy. How are you?
Good. You are a fellow podcaster. You're a farm business management enthusiast. You are founder and CEO of Pioneer Farmer. I'm so excited to have you on the show. We're going to be talking about a cool, catchy, and very important topic at all times, but I'd say especially right now. Banking secrets every farmer should know. So I'm excited for this. Are you?
Yeah, I'm excited to share, especially this time of year. Been having a lot of these conversations lately, so I think it's super relevant. And so hopefully going to be really impactful for the listener.
I love it. Before we dive in, do you want to talk about a little bit about who you are and what you do? We'll start there and then we'll go through.
Yeah, so just kind of high level overview. So I'm Garrett Ruskamp. Pioneer Farmer was the business that we started, but I'm also a farmer and rancher from Northeast Nebraska, kind of the middle of the country here. And so we farm currently, and we've got corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa are the crops that we raise. We've got a livestock operation. We do some custom work, so very involved from a diversification standpoint. And then, we also started a coaching consulting business for farmers and ranchers called Pioneer Farmer. And so kind of the way that I best explain that is, how most farmers and ranchers really kind of struggle with the chaos of staying organized and having a hard time understanding their finances. Well, through coaching, I help them get a handle on their time, understand their numbers, and plan for the future. I'm here to help farmers get more done in less time, but actually feel in control.
I think this is important, like the work that you do, because I don't know a lot of farmers that start farming because they love bookwork, right? They love farming. That's what we're good at. That's what we want to do. And then the rest might be something that we don't like focusing on. So the work that you do and the assistance that you offer farmers is so valuable. So kudos to you on the work that you do. Okay, I'm curious. Do you want to go into your personal story a little bit more? And actually, I'll put two questions together. Tell me about your personal story, farming, your farm operation, and then I am also curious about that moment, like the entrepreneurial story, when you're like, I should do this and help farmers. So how Pioneer Farmer came about. Do you want to talk to us about all that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think just to kind of answer the question that you just mentioned, as far as, most farmers don't get into this by being really good at numbers. And they're like, oh, by the way, farming makes sense because of the numbers. I feel like a lot of times we almost get, our hand gets forced to know the numbers to some extent. And that's kind of how we were in our operation. So kind of to take a step back, I'm fifth generation on our operation. So a lot of history, a lot of legacy. And I grew up in an era kind of by the generation that was raised by the generation, if that makes sense, that if you just work hard, you'll make a good living. And so I was really, hard work was like just up here for me, just top value for me between the farm and my faith and family. That's really all it comes down to. And so, when I was kind of in high school, I showed livestock, so very involved with the farm, and just always had this inclining that I was going to come back to the farm in one shape or another. And so, went to college, went to junior college, went for diesel technology, actually, to be a diesel mechanic, just so I could get back to the farm, because that was kind of my way that, okay, hey, how can I get back to farm? I think this is it. And then kind of worked off farm for a neighbor. And then, my dad kind of having that same mentality of it, how can we get Garrett back to the farm? And so in 2016, we actually built a hoop building and for calving cows in, and we expanded our cow-calf operation. At that time, we weren't a large operation, but, we had about 150 head of cows and we went to 300 head of cows. So we doubled in size. We took on this large expansion from infrastructure standpoint, and then, basically tried to get me back to the farm. And at that point, it was, we did all of this to some extent out of a hope or a prayer, or like, if we work hard, we'll make it through. Because my dad and my uncle was a part of the operation at the time too. That's kind of the generation that they live by. They started in the 80s, and yeah, they went through some hard times, but they also went through some really good times too. And their work ethic that seemed to pay off, right? And so that's why the bank went along with us. We're in a pretty good position, and so we went ahead with this adventure. And so I came back to the farm more or less just because we had the workload. And I feel like that happens all the time is, well, the finances will work itself out. But, we got enough work here to do. Yeah. And our famous saying was always, well, we got enough work for 3 people. We got 2 people in the operation, enough income for 1.5. You know what I mean? So that was kind of the case for me. So I came back to the operation full time in late 2016 after we expanded. And then at that point, it was just kind of a whirlwind as we think about the events that unfolded. It was the typical, doing something new, doing something fun. At that time, that was something that was different in our area with the hoop building. We were calving twice a year. And then, we expense, right? This overhead expense. And we decided, well, if we can spread that out over more head, that might make more sense, right? Economically. So we expanded again, and we went from 300 cows to 450 head of cows. Wow. So within a couple of years, we expanded quite a bit. And so that was, for our area, that's a pretty good sized cow-calf operation. And so we had plenty of work to do. And, I was a young guy coming back to the family at that time. We also got married in 2016, by the way. And so it was just lots of fun things. We were working, and I didn't mind the work. It was fun. We were doing something new, but the financial struggles was what really started to take a toll. When things just weren't structured the way that they maybe could have been. Like I said, took on a lot of debt with that expansion, and so we started having some uncomfortable conversations with the bank. Which we're going to get into today. Those uncomfortable conversations. What can we do? What should we do? What do our numbers look like? And just really sitting in there, not sure what the future is going to hold, right? And so that's where it just was. We almost got baptized by fire in that we were forced to, all of a sudden we had to look at the numbers. We had to focus on what we were doing, and we had some major changes in the operation. My uncle actually ended up leaving the operation in about 2020, and so that really changed the dynamics. And then, as we were progressing, in 2018, our first son was born. 2022, our second son was born. So, we're raising a family we're trying to survive economically, financially, trying to make sure that the 5th generation, isn't the one that loses this all. And not saying we got to that point, but we got to where we were in some really heavy conversations. Like, what does this look like? If we don't make some changes, we're going to start losing all the equity that we built up over these years, right? And so just a lot of hard conversations. And my dad, great guy, I look up to him so much, but he was just the worker, right? He would rather work outside day in, day out, and he still does. But he wasn't necessarily the numbers guy. And so I just felt like I had to take ownership on my shoulders. Me being the son of the father who tried to get his son back to the operation, I felt so much of that weight on my shoulders, like, hey, we need to figure this out or this is going to go under. And so that's what we did. And we kind of sat down and we just started working on the numbers. And I actually didn't mind that side of things. But it was back to what I made the comment earlier. Our hand was kind of forced that we had to do this. Otherwise, we were not going to survive. So I guess in a roundabout way, that kind of what led to ultimately, okay, we started to make some changes. We did some drastic changes, and we looked at things differently, looked at the numbers, spent some time in the office working on the business, not just in the business. And then we kind of just, like I said, made some changes. And so I kind of fast forward to where we are today, that's what kind of led to Pioneer Farmer ultimately, is because having some of that uncertainty, kind of that fog of uncertainty lifted off of our shoulders, and having that ability to breathe again, just helping other farmers and ranchers do the same thing. And that's ultimately when it comes to, I guess, your second part of your question there. Sorry if this is getting long-winded, but
I should have separated the questions. No, that's great. Keep on going. I love it.
no, but I guess just to, why we started Pioneer Farm, it was just that, because so many operations go through that same thing, whether it be bringing the next generation back or afraid to bring the next generation back or just trying to get started yourself. And the work ethic isn't a problem. We'll work all day, all night if we have to, but it's focusing on the numbers, making sure that our time is well worth it. You know what I mean? And so that's to where, we felt that weight. And so we want to help other farmers, ranchers work through that same thing. And so there too, kind of forced our hand to do that. And then we just thought, hey, maybe there's an opportunity for us to help others do this. At the time, I was actually going through a program that really helped us focus on our finances. And then the guy that I was working with really challenged me to focus on my time and getting that return on time. I'll kind of mention that later, but it's kind of ROT instead of ROI, it's ROT, return on time. And so that's to where I really shifted my mindset and said, hey, let's maybe see if this is something that we can give it a go. And so that's ultimately kind of my why, how we got this started. And ever since then, it's just been almost kind of like this something clicked. Like this just seemed like this is a good fit for me. I really enjoy helping others, especially if there's something that I can provide value to other operations, and we're still in it, right? So I kind of say we've got a really vested interest in making sure that we get some of these issues figured out that a lot of the people working with are working with.
I love it. I think back really quick, a personal comment, my grandfather and farmers of previous generations and the dollars at stake. And sure, it's all relative to the income and the times they were in. But not only do we sometimes just prefer to be in production and you're busy and you're tired and you have family and all of those things. So you have the busyness and then the maybe I don't like doing the book work. But maybe you look at the times that we're in and the dollars that are involved in our farming operations now, the debt level and the income level and the uncertainty. I don't think we have a choice but to be the best business owner and chief financial officer of our business now. I don't think we even have an option. The dollars are too big, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to, it's not necessarily the theme I was going for, but the forcing your hand. What I mean? We don't really have a choice in that. If you want to stay in this, and this is where I talk about, preserving the legacy, preserving the lifestyle that we've built, the identity that we have. I know I actually, listened to some episodes you had beforehand. I think the one before was like the mental health side of things. You really honed in on the identity that farmers have. And if we want to preserve that, we need to focus on this. And our identity as farmers most of the time is that guy that has strong hands, that's out doing the manual labor and the work and the production side of things, right? But if we want to continue to do that, we need to make sure that we're sitting in the office at some point and doing our due diligence, making sure that everything we're doing, all the decisions we're making are taking us in the right direction. So absolutely, I'd say we're at a point, and it's only going to evolve from here. I mean, you look 10 years from now, 20 years now, we're probably going to think back, well, we had it so easy back then. You know what I mean? We always look back on the past. Yeah. And so absolutely, I think that there's no better time to focus on this than now.
Okay. I love it. So you work a lot with farmers directly in your business. Actually, do you want to speak? I want to ask you that. What exactly in Pioneer Farmer, what do you do with farmers? What type of work? Let's start there. And then that's going to lead me to my next question. Do you mind going there?
Absolutely. And we get that question a lot. And quite frankly, with us being, somewhat a new business, I'm trying to hone in on that message a little bit more because there is probably a little bit of confusion. I actually just got off a phone call with somebody like, well, you're coaching consulting. What does that mean? Okay, well, let me just kind of walk you guys through this with the listeners. So basically the way that I try to explain this is, we're trying to get like a 1-2 punch when it comes to the clients that we work with, right? So we got the tools that we provide, which would be like an online software to manage the critical components that every business needs to manage, your farm especially. So those would be your balance sheet, your cash flow, your cost of production, right? Kind of those 3 critical components, the basics. And so we help you get those established, answer any questions, make sure you have the tools you need to, have the knowledge back into your operation, all right? But then the second side of that is the knowledge and support. Okay, so those tools are out there. Anybody can look up the tools that they need. You can create a spreadsheet. You can find the software. You can put all this information together. You can muddle your way through it to try to understand it, to get it into a point where it's easy to understand, and you can use that information to make better decisions. But what I think is really beneficial is when you combine that with kind of the accountability and then the knowledge and the support to make sure that we're going in the right direction, right? That's really what a coach does, is just kind of that person to help take you to your goals, right? And so that's where I kind of bring that into kind of full picture there is, we're helping farmers establish those critical components, understand their finances, right? Help them get organized, maybe make sure that they're spending their time wisely, and then just going in the right direction, trying to accomplish their goals much quicker.
Nice. One thing I wanted to share with you, I think the work that you're doing is so well timed and so needed with farmers, especially with the dollars and the decisions, everything we just touched on. But I always like to say I have a leg on both sides of the fence for a few different reasons, like age-wise, but also I was in the startup, the entrepreneurial part of the economy. And in that part of the world, the scaling up, the hiring coaches, the hiring a fractional CFO, a chief financial officer, somebody to help you, that's commonplace. And now we look at the dollars involved, the time, the bandwidth that farmers need. And one further to that, in farming, we're pretty humble, boots on the ground, but the size of business, the dollars, the equity, what we're worth, the money that goes through our hands, it is big dollars. And if you took those dollars outside of agriculture, that same business would probably have about 5 full-time staff managing marketing, finances, but then now come back to agriculture and it's like poor farmers doing it all. I mean, whether or not you have help, but you're really like chief marketing, chief finance, CEO, right? It's crazy the amount of pressure that's on farmers. So when I'm seeing individuals like you coming into the agriculture space for farmers, I'm sitting here going hallelujah, about time, right?
Right.
Anyway,
for
sorry,
sure.
random comment, but
Yeah, for sure. And I guess the comment I'll make on that to add to that is you talk about the difference in today with all the dollars that we're running through our bank accounts, right? And I talk to so many people, and on the humble side of things as well. So many people are like, well, I just got a small operation. I'm like, well, what does that mean by definition? You're probably still running $1 million in revenue, or just, there's a lot of money running through your account, right? And so, and back to as far as the different hats that we wear, I'm a ball cap guy, always got one on, but there's so many different hats that we wear within the operation. Like every 5 minutes, you could probably be switching it out for something else that we're doing, which can be, not to dive off into a different rabbit hole, but can be really hard to maintain the proper mindset too for each of those different, tasks that you're trying to do, between if you're doing HR, working with employees, or you're doing marketing, or you're back to the financial side of things. And by the way, take it all off and go home and be present with the family. It's not easy. I mean, there's so many challenges that we face, and I didn't mean to kind of dive off into that, but when it comes to all the challenges that we face, going to dive into here as on the business side of things, is everything is related. Everything is related, tied back to the personal side, tied back to everything that we deal with on the business side as well.
Okay. And don't feel bad about the rabbit hole, the rabbit trail there, because I brought you there. But I thought about it, and I like to say that because I see this work over here, and now it's in agriculture, and I'm like, well-timed, perfect. This is the support that farmers need, right? So not your fault. We're going down the rabbit trail. I'll take you there a few times, I'm sure.
Sounds good.
Okay. So now the question that I had started with, you work with farmers and you're helping them. I'm just curious, how is it out there? What are farmers feeling with the commodity prices, the pressure? Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it can be really hard to gauge exactly where it's at from a high level overview, because if we think back to, I feel like there's been a lot of comparison now till back to like the 1980s farm crisis.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not going to age myself here, but I wasn't around in the 80s. All right. So I don't remember what that was like. But I will say that I feel like looking back at those times, there are a lot of comparisons to where we're at today. A lot of differences as well. But when I say that is I also think back to those times, And kind of back to our personal story, I had my dad on the podcast a while back for him to share. He started farming in early 1980s, and I was like, what was it like? What are all the challenges like? And they actually bought some land mid 1980s, and they did just fine. So when I say that is because there's so many different operations out there that are in so many different seasons of their business that there might be some really operations that are doing just fine right now. You look at a lot of the cattle operations in our neck of the woods. We are actually in cattle country, a lot of feed yards, row crop or cow calf operations on the western end of the state. And so those guys are doing pretty good, which is about time. You know what I mean? You understand as a livestock person, there's a lot of hard times in the past, but what I'm getting at here is there's going to be a lot of diversity in the different operations out there and how they're feeling the current financial stresses. Obviously, the inflation's hitting all of us, so we just got more money running through the bank account. On the even the livestock side of things, even people want to continue to maintain their herds or fill their feed yards. It takes a lot more capital just to do that. So we got to make sure we got our ducks in a row for there. If you're increasing that line of credit, or if we're just asking more dollars, right? And so from overall, I'd say from the row crop side of things, yeah, we're feeling the stress. We're feeling the stress, and here in the United States, anyways, you can tell that by a lot of the payments that are coming to farmers. Are they necessary? Yeah, I'd say so. They're definitely going to help a lot of operations, and a lot of folks that I've been talking to lately, they're counting on those payments to really help them carry through. And unfortunately, a lot of the banks are counting on them as well to make sure that they can have that income to pay off their line of credit or to get their new line of credit renewed. And so, yeah, there's just so many challenging times right now. Each operation's different, but I have had a lot of conversations lately where they're just trying to figure out how to get their line of credit renewed. The bank's just kind of pumping the brakes a little bit, which, by the way, is a really challenging place to be, but it's not always a bad thing. And I don't want to come off as the negative person here, but going back to our operation, when we had to have those uncomfortable conversations, if we hadn't gone through that, if we hadn't been forced to really focus on the finances, at some point you're going to have to, it's just going to have to happen. So I say that because sometimes we just need to take a step back, and maybe that's the wake-up call we need to really shift things and focus on things, because this is a challenging time in ag right now. This could be considered a crisis, but if you want to continue to maintain your legacy and sustain this in the future, whether you're transitioning it on or you're a young guy, you're gonna probably come into some hard times in the future again. So why not try to learn these lessons now and try to work through them as best as you can? And I don't mean to be that negative guy, because when you're in the thick of things, it sucks. So that's kind of my comments as far as overall industry and the things that I'm seeing.
I know what you mean. Nobody likes hearing that, especially when you're going through hard times. But when you're out, when you make it out to the other side, we've gone through that, me and my media company. When you go through good times, don't necessarily make you the best business person, right? Because you're like, yeah, whatever. I won't name things that we might buy as farmers, but the great times don't make you the best business person, I don't think. I mean, they give you confidence, they give you all these other things, but hindsight, now that I'm out of those yucky periods for my media company, you go through that time, right? And then you tighten things up, and then you're like, oh, here's my numbers, and let's be tight, because now we know. I've had different guests also say that some of us that have come into farming, I mean, again, that's a hard thing, right? Like, what's your operation? Is it all paid off? Are you cattle? Are you grain? But for the last 20 years, we've had some good times, like solid times. And one of my guests, I won't name him, but he's just said, a lot of us haven't known some of these hard times. So now that's that wake-up call. And that's what I like about what we're going to talk about today, is those banking secrets. You've gone through it. I'm sure many in our audience will be like, yes, we've learned these lessons. So do you want to talk about the banking secrets that you have learned? Let's start with a comment that you made. And I'll give you a plug for a video that you have on your website. It's the Banking Secrets, I believe it is. And and it's a short little video. We'll include the link in the show notes here, just if you guys are watching, you want to go. But one of the things that you started off with that caught my attention is it's not necessarily the banker that gives you the most amount of stress. Do you want to pick up on that comment? Do you remember what I'm referring to? It's just not being comfortable with your numbers, I think, is what you were trying to say.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess trying to recall what I was thinking about there, but back to even what we were saying before, as far as when we're going through good times, we probably tend to get a little bit relaxed, right? Yeah. And when we go through uncomfortable times, that's when we actually get really creative sometimes. And so that's where I kind of, like I said, when we went through some hard times, we had to get creative. And that's where we kind of, when we come to talking about the banking side of things and what we can do to improve that relationship there. And so a lot of times I feel like if we go back to, okay, let's say some good times, or the way that most farmers maybe perceive the way it is working with the bank is like, well, it's going to be a tough year, but we're just going to go in and we're going to get it renewed. It just happens almost like automatically, right? And this is just something that just happens. Or I'm going to give the bank the financials that it needs, and tomorrow it'll be approved, and we'll just keep on farming on, right? But at the end of the day, that's not always the case. And so I think when it comes to the banking side of things and talking about some of these different, quote unquote secrets, but they're also just kind of common things that are out there. We just need to kind of fully understand and grasp, right? And so when it comes to some of those, as I'm thinking about this, is we are the ones that are trying to facilitate our financing needs to the bank. So how can we do that effectively and make it easier on the banker, and make it easier for them to do their job? Because if it's easier for them, we're going to ultimately get the financing that we need. And I always say, whether we're in good times or bad, there's never a bad time for us to improve that relationship with the banker, because you never know. You cattle guys over there, you just never know in a couple of years where this thing can crash and you're going to be exactly where the row crop guys are. And I'm not trying to paint
Don't
that
remind me. Don't
No,
remind us.
I hope this hangs around for a long time for you guys. But row crop guys, 3 years ago, we were sitting in really good times. We had some really good prices, and now this thing flips pretty damn fast. And so, pardon my French. But anyways, that's to where, we talk about what can we do to really improve those relationships. And so I think there's a lot of things a guy can do, starting with the 5 C's of credit. Now, a lot of folks have probably heard about the 5 C's of credit, and they're pretty common, but just to kind of review them real quickly is we're going to start with character, then we're going to go to capacity and cash flow, which are kind of the same, and go into capital, collateral, and then the last one is context. So, really focusing on what can we control within each of those. All right. So the character, starting with number 1, that's where I think we can really change the game here. When we talk about what are the secrets, well, that's part of it. Just being able to control, what's our relationship with the bank, and being able to give them the information that they need to make their job easier. So that's going to be a really good starting place there. And a lot of that character can sometimes, positive or negative, can be boiled down from maybe generations before you as well. If you're working with a banker that has been with your family for quite a while, so positive or negatively, that could really be affecting that relationship. But just thinking about what can I do to communicate effectively, to carry through with everything I said I'm going to do, so they can trust me, so they can feel comfortable lending to me. All right, that's the big one there, is making sure that the bank feels comfortable lending to you.
Nice. Do you want to go through the other ones? I'm glad that you dove right into the 5 C's. Do you want to go deeper into each one of them?
Yep, I sure can.
Okay.
And I stopped with that just because character, when it comes to a lot of these things, that's what we're trying to build up. If we can give them the information that they need, if we can give them all the documents that they require and then some, that's what we're going to help build, is that character side of things, right? So on the capacity, that's just talking about what's your operations cash flow look like? Can you pay your bills? Are you going to be able to pay back this line of credit that you're trying to get renewed? Are you going to be able to pay back this term loan that you're trying to take out to buy a combine or buy cattle or cows or whatever you're trying to do, right? So what does that actually look like? Do you have the capacity to pay that back? All right, and then capital. Capital is just talking about how much of the operation do you truly own. And when we get to looking at some of these different operations out there, if you're a young guy trying to get started out, the odds are you probably don't own a lot of your operation. You might be heavily leveraged or heavily financed, which, by the way, I don't always think is a bad thing, because you got to start somewhere. right? You got to start somewhere. But where I see problems, and you can kind of give your input here as well, but where I see problems is when we are heavily leveraged and do not have a positive cash flow, or do not have a business that is going to be cash positive and going to be able to be profitable. That's where we start kind of running into some problems, is being able to kind of pay our bills, really. And so that's a big one there is, what do you actually own of your operation, or how much does the bank actually own, right? And so that would be kind of capital there. And then collateral, what is the bank going to use as collateral to secure this loan that you're getting, and just knowing exactly what you have out there for collateral. And by the way, just kind of a side note here, when it comes to collateral and staying organized here, is a lot of operations, it's pretty common to maybe go get financing over here at John Deere Financial, or here at FSA for a land note, or here at Bank A at personal assets and Bank B at business assets. You know what I mean? And so, what's your capital across all of your different assets? What does that look like? Is it capital that's more liquid? Is it capital that's has a really good store value, like real estate? Is a lot of your capital or collateral tied up into equipment, and that's going to be depreciating? Or so a lot of different things that a guy can look at there. And then the last one there is just going to be kind of context, right? Or conditions, I guess. They're kind of the same thing. What are the current conditions? And that's where we can look at the current conditions right now in the row crop industry. They don't look very good. They don't look very fun. But at the end of the day, we're not trying to, the big thing here, coming back to even the character side of things, we're not trying to hide anything. We're not trying to run from it. We're trying to make sure that we're well aware of the facts, right? Asking ourselves, what are the facts, and make sure that we're not hiding that, and just kind of even taking ownership of it. And that's another side comment there, but that can be a really hard thing for farmers to do sometimes. Is part of why they don't necessarily want to look at these numbers, is because once they look at the numbers, it's real, right? The facts are, the numbers are what they are, and so then they can't hide from it anymore. They have to kind of take ownership of it. So, just asking ourselves, what are the conditions, what are the contexts that we're operating in, and just being well aware of that.
I'm curious if and I was surprised. I've asked a previous guest that does similar work to what you do, if a majority of farmers have their financials and everything prepared, known, and clear. And he said, Tracy, you would be surprised. And this is not judging. This is not judging at all. Because again, like I said, 10 hats, we're busy. If we don't grow the crop or take care of the animals, we have nothing to report on the financials. So no judgment, clarity, and just to help us all feel like we're on the same page. But he said there are a lot of farmers that do not have financials, don't know how to read them, and aren't comfortable with that. Would you feel that's a fair statement?
Absolutely. And I'd say there's a lot of farmers that I'm using air quotes here, that know their numbers, or they think they know their numbers. They're up here, right? And they're just not on paper. And that's going to kind of go really right along with what we're talking about here, is going into the banker's office being like, well, I think we did this year. I think we did okay, or I feel like we did all right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily go a long ways in a banker's eyes. That's not numbers on a paper. That's just numbers in your head. And that's, at the end of the day, quite frankly, not good enough. Okay. And so that's where we're trying to change that. And so back to that comment, yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of farmers know the numbers, but it might be on the production side, or it might be on the side that they're immersed in on a daily basis. But I can tell you, it's also the numbers that they don't know that can weigh on you the most, right? It's the unknowns that we live in, these uncertainties that we live in, that can really weigh on an operation the most. Especially for farmers, if we're out there doing the work, the production side of things, running the tractor, feeding the cattle, whatever it is, we're probably running these numbers through our head at some point, trying to get a grip on them, but we still don't actually know. And so it's kind of that fear of the unknown that we end up falling victim of. And so that can be a really hard thing for a lot of farmers. And now whether it's because they don't have the right tools, or whether it's just because they're not taught, trained, and conditioned to focus on the finances, or maybe they just don't have the time. Maybe they just don't have the time because we're wearing all these different hats, like you mentioned. Multiple different reasons why we're not actually focusing on that. But yeah, I'd say there's a very few farmers or farm operations out there that actually know their numbers, and to the extent that's required today. That's kind of the way I'll put that.
And I don't say that to be judgy, because I know, and wherever we are, age and our journey and ownership, I think we all go through this. It's part of the being immersed as a business owner and learning those financials. I remember before we had strong financials, I mean, for my business, with my business partners, I learned that. I'm like, oh, and then we do it for the farm. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay, repairs. Yeah, okay, we fix that lemon of a tractor again. And it's like, okay, yeah, that was a bad year, probably about 20,000. Sure enough, you get the financials. 45,000? What? Because we don't realize there was this, and 5,000 and 3,000. And kind of building on what you were saying, we know our numbers, but it's those sneaky costs that aren't even small anymore that just add up. And all of a sudden, what you thought was 20 is 40. And good times forgive a lot of that expense. But tougher times, I think that's where it's critical that we know this, and for the banker, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I'll go back to, like I said, one of the C's there, kind of the capacity or the cash flow. And that's to where I think, having a good, clear cash flow established can take care of that unknown. When we got things are going to happen on the farm, things that we can't predict or can't control. That tractor is going to blow an engine, and it's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to cost more money tomorrow than it cost today. And so just knowing that, okay, this is what my cash flow currently looks like, and if something like this happens, how is this going to affect us? Or, by the way, this did happen. How does that change the picture moving forward? All right, so I kind of give this example when it comes to the cash flow side of things. Whenever I'm talking to somebody, and from a livestock gal, you might relate to this, but let's say you go out there and you're helping your husband trying to work cattle or something like that, and you got your sunglasses on, and something flings up at you, right? So you got something, your glasses all dirty with some manure or something. And so then all of a sudden you go put your sunglasses on, you drive in the pickup, jump in the pickup, drive down the road, 50, 60 mile an hour down the road. It's really hard to see what's coming at you when your vision is not clear, nice. Right? When you don't have that clarity, it's hard to be proactive. You're constantly being reactive, whatever's coming your way, because you can't see, you don't have that clarity. So that's exactly what we're trying to fix when it comes to the cash flow side of things. Let's make sure that we have a good idea as to what's coming down the road. Yeah, there's going to be some things that are unpredictable, but let's just make sure that we're doing what we can to be proactive versus reactive.
I love it. Okay, that's a perfect lead in then. I want to ask you that question because I was curious. I know our operation, kind of know what a few other people do, but finances are very personal, right? Gosh, we could go into the psychology of finances and asking for help. There's 2 more episodes, but I won't go down those rabbit trails. So let's say you're coaching somebody and they want to get renewed, or they're going for their first loan, whatever it is. What are the documents that a banker expects?
Yeah, so really good question. I mean, back to kind of those critical components that we mentioned, right? So they're going to need to know your balance sheet, which is your assets and liabilities. And they're just going to need to know, what do you actually have out there, making sure that we're not hiding anything, making sure that they're just well aware of everything that we have and all the debts that we have against that, right? So assets, liabilities making up your current balance sheet. And the big thing there with that balance sheet is also making sure that we have it on a consistent, timely manner at like a same time of year, because banks are really big about, and not to jump ahead a little bit, but they're trying to build this picture in their head, right? So the best way that they can do that without, being you, is to paint this picture and have like trend lines. So that's why we want to make sure that the bank is having the balance sheet that's updated at the same time every year, so they can compare it year over year. How much did it change? Why did it change? What were the different factors there, right? So the balance sheet, that's number 1. And then cash flow. Cash flow is number 2. And the cash flow could be a couple different things here. That could be like your actuals, like maybe a profit and loss from a QuickBooks, or just even all of your actual income and expenses from the last year. How did you actually perform? Not trying to hide anything there. That's where we go into the banker's office. We're like, well, I feel like we had a good year. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's what the actuals are for, the actual cash flow from the last year. That's what it's for, to kind of help paint that picture. And then the projected, what does the next year look like? As we talk about a line of credit renewal, we're trying to project ahead. What do things actually look like? And so how can we put some things into place there and show, what is my income projected to be for the next 12 months? What are my expenses? Hopefully it's positive. If it's not, why? What can we do to change that? And that, by the way, allows you as a business owner, all these things that we're talking about here that you need to give the bank to get your line of credit renewed. Usually in the back of our heads as farmers, we're just kind of checking this box. Just need to give them information, just give them whatever they need, get this line of credit renewed, get them out of our hair so we can move on and farm on. By the way, these are all the information, all these the cash flow, the balance sheet. We need all this information to make the best decisions possible for us as business owners too. So there's more reason than just to get the line of credit renewed to actually spend some time on these numbers, right? And so those are the first two, balance sheet, cash flow. Then we're going to go to and the profit and loss, kind of your income statement, pretty similar there. But then what's your debt schedule? What other debts do you have out there? And then the last one, there's going to be like your tax returns, right? Any previous tax returns. And a lot of people get a little bit, maybe it's, I guess the way I'm trying to explain that is sometimes bankers, you think that they need that tax return. They're going to base all of your information off of that. But kind of be forthcoming. A lot of times they just need that to check a box, right? If a banker's using a tax return to base whether you're going to renew your line of credit, as you know, as a business owner, tax returns can be kind of manipulated, right? Because it's kind of that famous saying where we walk down the street to the accountant's office, try to convince them that we didn't make any money. Then we walk back down the street to the banker's office and try to convince them we made all this money. And it's just, at the end of the day, numbers are what they are, but they can be manipulated. So we just got to do our best to make sure that they're accurate.
Sorry, I laugh. I've never heard. I've heard that, but I've never heard somebody say it quite like that. You're over here with this outcome, over here trying to tell them a different story. But that's exactly it. And numbers lie. And if you're not reading the right numbers, right? These
Exactly.
guys need these numbers. Yes. Okay. Can I ask you, did you cover all the documents the banker needs? I think you did, right?
Well, yes, but and so this is where I'm going to add to this, because you're probably, people that are listening to this might be thinking, well, I thought we were talking about secrets here. A lot of this is pretty common knowledge, and this is where I want to give you kind of really the dynamite at the end of the day. So those are the documents that the banker requires or really expects. But what about the documents that they don't expect that's really going to bode well for you as an operation? All right. So this is where when we're working with folks, and any of your listeners can do this as well, is making sure that we're putting together extra documents that bridge that gap. Right. So the numbers that we gave them before, those are what's going to speak for you when you're not in the room. But what about what's left behind? Sometimes numbers leave gaps behind. So we're just trying to make sure we fill in those gaps for that banker. Once again, trying to make it easier for them. Because at the end of the day, that banker that you're talking to, that you're sitting across from, trying to facilitate your financing needs, they're there just trying to paint the picture to, the board or to who they're trying to get your loan approved by, right? So we want to make sure that they understand this picture and they can paint that picture clearly to them as well, right? So how do we do some of those things? Well, a couple of additional documents that I say a guy could give them that's going to be really helpful is, when it comes to like your production plans. Okay, so we talked about like, the balance sheet, the cash flow, but then even, let's make sure we have your cost of production thrown in there, right? Your break evens. Okay. So for all of your different crops and livestock, your different income streams, if you're running different businesses, making sure that they're separated and they're not just kind of all muddled together. Like even right now, for most operations that are diversified, if you've got crops and then you've got cattle, the cattle might be carrying them right now. But let's at least know what's the difference in the profitability from each of those different sectors, right? And so breaking that out and then having those production plans in place to back up the numbers that we give them. So backing up that cash flow. Well, where did these numbers come from? Are we just typing this on a piece of paper to make it look like we're going to be really positive this year? Or do we have numbers to back this up? So like your production plans, but then furthermore, like all of your risk management plans as well. All right. So I say that'd be like your crop insurance and your marketing side of things. All right. So, when we're putting together our cost of production and we throw out our yield of, for corn example, maybe we throw out 200 bushels per acre. Well, where did that number come from? Is that the best you've ever raised, or is that like your insurance guarantee, or what is that number? So the banker can kind of understand, are you being conservative here? Or are you shooting for a home run, hoping that you get this and hoping that we can actually get to that point? And then on the marketing side of things, if we put in a price of $4 for corn on there, is that realistic? Is that what you have forward contracted? Is that what the crop insurance price is going to be? Where did those numbers actually come from? And that just kind of backs up all the information that you put together, because like I said before, numbers are facts, but they can be manipulated. They are what they are, but they can be manipulated by whoever puts them together. So let's just make sure we have that information to kind of back up those numbers, right? And now I want to go to a couple other things here that I really think will propel things even further than that. All right. So a couple things that we've kind of put together and we've had firsthand experience with the clients that we work with, and even within our own operation. So we got 2 additional documents. One's called like an annual business overview, which is basically just explaining your operation. Now, whether you're working with a new banker or you're working with one that you've had for the last 30 years, maybe just explain, okay, this is the ownership, this is the acres, this is the number of head that we raise, and this is kind of our history. Just kind of explain everything. Just share a little bit about you. This is your time to actually talk about yourself, talk about your operation, and then talk about, what challenges did we face last year, and how did we overcome those challenges? What are challenges we're going to face going forward? And let's highlight those. What are we going to do about that? And then in that same document, we're kind of highlighting our, what's our capital needs? What's our financing that we're actually trying to ask for? Basically, we're just trying to build out a game plan, business plan, right? Most farms are just kind of so used to going to the banker's office and just kind of getting everything done and trying to do the bare minimum. But let's be business owners for a second, and let's actually build this plan out, and let's have the documents that we need to kind of support that. The last one here is actually to kind of strengthen that character side of things and strengthen that relationship. So we call this operations assessment guide, which just really supports that two-way conversation. The first part of this is going to be questions about your operation. So how does the bank see my operation? What are some things that I could do better? What are some things that you like? How would you rate us, kind of amongst all the other operations out there? And then the second part of that is asking about the bank. What's the bank's overall portfolio? What kind of operations are they working with? What are some challenges that the bank is currently seeing right now? And the dynamite question that I think is really helpful to know is, who's the backup to you at the bank that we could be working with? So if you're not there and I need to get some help, or, who's the backup that's going to know my operation just like you do, so that way I don't run into a hiccup just because you're not here, right? So I that's really long-winded, but there's a lot of information there that really helps paint that picture, helps fill in the gaps than just the typical numbers that every farmer is really going to have to give the banker.
Nice. I like that. And those are the secret sauce. I heard somebody say, and I can't quite remember the context, but they said the time of equity banking is over. Like where you go in and the banker's like, yeah, it's good. Lots of equity. Prices are good. And then it's just a little bit easier. Now it's like you come in as a business person and we need the numbers. And I'm sure they needed that before, but there was that comment made, equity banking, the time of equity banking is over. I found that interesting. Can I ask you, we have a large portion of Canadian farmers in the audience and American farmers as well, growing every day. I think the banking environment's quite a bit different in the US to Canada. Your options, and I would say private, like in Canada, for agriculture banking, there's very few. And I mean, then all the credit unions are amalgamated. There's really just 5 big brands, so to speak. I might be missing some, but it's very few options. And then we go to the States and it seems like there's a lot of private lenders. And here's what I'm going into, because we hear about banks calling loans, one. And then number 2, you talk about renewing your line of credit. So I think there's some differences in the banking environments. And is that really happening? Like banks just say, okay, we're getting scared about agriculture, we're just calling your loan? That really happens?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing that a little bit too. And I can't speak to north of the border. Can't say I'm well
Yeah.
versed on that. But down here, anyways, because there are so many different private banks, each bank is so different. And so I think, yeah, that we're seeing that, but it could be for different reasons too. It could be one bank that got too leveraged, or maybe
Okay.
just has more row crop producers right now, or just
Oh,
it just really depends. So, we've worked with, especially, quite frankly, most of the people that reach out to us are to the point where they need some help, and there's nothing wrong with that. They say, hey, our banker called and he's not going to renew our line of credit. What do we do? And at that point, it's a lot harder because we're going back to we're being reactive. We're no longer in a lot of control at that point. So yes, it's definitely happening. Now, to what extent, it's hard to say, because you talk to one bank and they're like, no, that's not happening here. And I'm like, well, are you sure about that? And so I've definitely had a lot of conversations lately, and it just depends where you're at. It just depends the operations. It depends the bank that they're working with. And by the way, I had one guy that I talked to a while back that, they were calling his loan, or I guess they just weren't renewing it. They weren't renew his line of credit, which is kind of the same thing, just kind of basically saying, hey, you got to go find financing elsewhere, which is usually a pretty big shocker there, right? And so, but that specific situation, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing because the bank that he was with wasn't necessarily doing him any favors,
okay.
right? So there's so many different bankers out there and banking institutions, and they're all treated a little bit differently, which is kind of surprising in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But that's the one big kind of eye opener that I've witnessed as I've worked with a lot of people, is all the bankers are so different. And so I guess my kind of comment to that, and what does a guy do? How can we be proactive in trying to prevent some of those situations? When it comes to, and maybe even your listeners up there in Canada, the big thing when we're talking about this, trying to make sure we have all this information put together. But let's not wait to, a lot of line of credits might be coming due here in March 15th, or just thrown out of date. Let's not wait till March 10th to go into the banker's office and give them all this information, or to say, hey, what do I need to do? Let's be proactive. Let's have all this information gathered up, say by year end, or let's be proactive in getting it to him ahead of time so he has plenty of time to get this renewed, or be the first one on the top of that stack that's this high, so that way he can get us renewed a lot quicker, if that makes sense.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more uncomfortable, silly question because it's on my brain, and I don't know if it's just me, but it's on my brain, and I'm pretty sure it's different here and there, Canada to US. Do you guys have to renew your line of credit every year? Is that what happens in the States?
Generally, yes.
Okay.
There are some operations that you can get like a 3-year line of credit or something like that, to where you only have to renew every 3 years, which quite frankly, I don't think is a good idea. I don't think it's a bad idea to have to renew every year, to force yourself to some extent to go into your banker's office, to have these conversations, to get the numbers updated. All right, if we kind of get this line of credit for 3 years, and it's pretty easy to get really relaxed in kind of how we're operating, if we just know, okay, this is just set in place. When we look at a line of credit, basically it's just kind of a source of funding to get us by, right? In when ebbs and flows of the market, or in income, right? But we generally tend to almost look at it backwards, like, well, this is just a bank account that we can use. Well, no, we got to pay this back, and there's interest on this whenever we're loaned against it. And so it just making sure that we're managing that appropriately. But to answer your question, it really just depends. But generally, for most operations around here, it is just a 1-year line of credit. And the reason that is because a line of credit is to be used for current assets. It's to be used to buy, feed or crop inputs. And then once you sell that, you should have the income to pay that back, right? And so that's why it's generally just kind of a 1-year term there.
Interesting. Okay, now I'm going to speak for myself, and I'm pretty sure if there are individuals in the audience in Canada and I'm wrong and your situation is different, please correct me because I need to know this. Here, as far as I understand, you get a loan, you get a line of credit, you get a line of credit. I'll speak to me, my media company, and our farm business. When you keep on, and this is why I'm asking about this, because us Canadians are probably like, what? When I got my line of credit, you just applied for it, and I have it, and it's there, and it's never renewed. It's just there forever. I guess until maybe you can't pay for it and then they take it away. I haven't had that situation. That's my media company. But then going to our farm, we've had a line of credit for our farm. We don't renew it every year. You get it and you have it. So when you're saying renewing the line of credit, I'm like, what? What's going on? So anyways, we have a large portion of Canadians here. So I wanted to say that. And maybe it's different at different dollar amounts. I mean, I don't have a massive line of credit and we're a beef operation. Maybe if it's a grain operation, they have to renew it, but I don't know. That's different.
That's interesting, and I would be curious to know that as well. I guess kind of just to add something to that, or more or less just to almost inform the listener. For a lot of cases, how it works down here is, if you're getting a line of credit that's at the same bank where you have your bank account, what we've got is like a revolving line of credit to where it automatically sweeps to your bank account, right?
Yeah.
And so what'll happen is if you do not get your line of credit renewed, they'll freeze that. And so it won't sweep, and all of a sudden, you're kind of stuck. If you got to pay some bills, if you don't have actually cash in the account, which most don't, by the way, that's to where it can be a really big problem. And that's to where if we wait too long to go in to say talk to the banker and figure out, what's our line of credit renewal going to look like, any concerns about that, by the way, and don't have that conversation soon enough, that's to where we can get ourselves in a pinch and to a point of panic, and to where now we're trying to figure out, trying to rush to get this thing figured out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm glad I went there. I had to ask, and I would love if there's other Canadians that have to renew their line of credit, please tell me, because I do want to know. But the reason I asked too, one, that's super important, but also you hear of some guys that have had some tough years. Now the banker, and it goes right into what we're talking about, being strong with your financials, being upfront, being ready. But you hear of these guys that are going to try and get their line of credit renewed. And then the bank's like, yeah, no, sorry, we need some income. And then the farmers are like, we need money to create income. And then they're in a tough position. So to me, and I know the work you do, and the purpose of my show is to make us the strongest farm business managers so that we're on top of that, so that we can continue to farm. I mean, long story short, right? We got to be good business managers and good producers. So I had to ask the silly question. I don't think that's just me here in Canada. I'm curious, but it's neat to know the different nuances across the line for Canadians and Americans. Okay,
yeah, for sure.
I wanted to say that because you do hear, of course, you hear the bad stories and the farmers that are facing hard times and no renewals. You are huge on mindset. And I love that, because mindset's what carries us through good times, bad times. It's so important. And to be honest, I don't think it gets chit-chatted about, covered enough in agriculture, because it's production, business. Mindset's huge. So talk a little bit about the fear or purpose. You had one video that you shared, podcast on YouTube. Fear or purpose, what will drive you in 2026? And I want to get you to share some of that, because sometimes there's somebody in the audience that needs some encouragement and words of wisdom. Do you want to chat a little bit about mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess kind of back to that specific episode. So, as we, at least down where we're at, the sentiment is pretty dark. You know what I mean? Within agriculture, we're facing so many challenges. Even if you're a cattle guy, there's still a lot of challenges that we're facing. A lot of the feed yards in our area, you're still working on margin, right? The cattle just cost more. And so, I mean, when it comes to kind of that overall mindset, okay, and so with that specific episode, talking about what's going to drive us forward, when we get into hard times, I think there can be some pros to focus on what's almost at stake. If we don't, talking about like kind of what's driving us, what's going to cause you to actually take action. There can be some validity to focusing on what's at stake as far as, what are we going to lose if we don't do something here? If I don't, back to our situation, okay, back to our personal story, if I didn't focus on the numbers, if I didn't take ownership, if at early 20s, mid 20s, if I didn't be the guy that focused on the numbers and did what we had to do, what's at stake? Well, we could have very well lost our operation. I would have been the fifth generation and the last. I've actually got 4 boys, and they would They maybe not have farmed on our land, right? So there's importance to go to that place as far as, realizing what's at stake. But speaking from experience here, when we go to that place and we realize what's at stake, it can be the driver to kind of get your butt out of the seat, but it can also be the thing that holds you exactly where you're at and you don't make any moves. Okay. And it can be the thing that just keeps you still. It keeps you in a dark place to where you don't know if it's even worth making moves. Okay. So I say that because that's very real. And when we get into dark, challenging times, and I say when, not if, everybody's going to have to go through something at some point. So now I like to do the best that I can for myself, but then also for the folks that we're working with and for all of your listeners as well, is how do we flip that? Right? How do we flip that to where what's going to be the driver for you that's going to actually sustain that action long term? Right? Let's focusing on the future. Let's focus on what we can do, what's possible, by the way, if we focus on the things that are hard, if we focus on the numbers, if we focus on taking ownership, right? And so for me, going back to my personal situation, trying to work through that is, realizing what's possible. Well, what's possible if I flip that is, we're going to learn a lesson here. We're going to focus on the numbers. We're going to be better business owners. We're going to be better operators. We're hopefully going to make better decisions. Still going to always make mistakes, but hopefully we're going to be able to learn from them. And then, hopefully what's possible is I'll be able to have the sixth generation come back to farm at some point. Realizing what's possible for me anyways, and it's different for each person, is going to drive me to take action long-term a lot and going to be a lot more sustainable for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love it. I love the mindset portion of it. So I'm so happy you go there. And I look through some of your episodes on YouTube. I'm like, yeah, good. Got to listen to that one. So thank you for not only the farm business focus, that's so important, but the mindset. Because, hey, I'll share my Tony Robbins quote that I love sharing. I do some coaching of entrepreneurs. Business or life, I would say, is 80% mindset, 20% strategy. And it's what goes on up here that can, like you said, just paralyze us, right?
Absolutely. And especially as an entrepreneur, I'm sure you face this as well. Entrepreneurs, farmers, we're all kind of all the one and the same. Yeah. And, we generally feel like we're kind of on this boat alone. Yeah. And so that mindset side of things can be a really big struggle. And I'm constantly working on that myself. And it's probably honestly my biggest enemy at times. And so if a guy can work through that, I mean, that's honestly not a shameless plug here, but that's kind of why we call it Pioneer Mindset, right? Our podcast. And so that's to where, we really try to focus on that mindset side of things. And I think, and even, like I said, not to get too sidetracked here, but when it comes to everything that we talked about today, we can realize that, okay, this is important to improve the relationship with the bank, take advantage of these different secrets, these different opportunities that are out there. But if we don't shift our mindset around even time to focus on this, nothing's going to change. You know what I mean? So that's to where that mindset is huge at the end of the day.
I love it. Okay. So I want to shine a light again on the work that you do with farmers. I imagine there's going to be two types of people that are going to come see you. It's going to be people that are going, Mayday, I just need help. And you're there for that person. And then there's going to be people that are either new, young. I don't think age matters. It's where you're coming in, how complex it's getting. So there's going to be that person going, Mayday, or there's going to be the person trying to be proactive and going, can you help me become a better business manager? So if somebody's in the audience and they're curious about the work that you do, where can they learn more? Do you want to give a call out to the work that you do?
Yeah, for sure. And I think you said it best, because that's generally the way that it happens. I mean, farmers will drag our feet, we'll procrastinate as much as we can, or just, got to make hay while the sun shines. Well, it seems like the sun is always shining because we're always making hay, or we're always busy doing something outside, or always have that excuse, right? And so, yeah, it's pretty common to where we get a lot of folks that come to us when I don't want to say it's too late, but they've waited long enough. And I don't mean to say that in a negative way. That's so common, but they're coming to us in a place where they really need the help pretty fast. And then there's the flip side where there's people want to be proactive. They want to make sure that they're doing their due diligence to take advantage of opportunities when they come and getting their financial house in order, right? And so if those folks, no matter where you're at, anywhere in between that, if you want to learn more, definitely visit us on our website at pioneerfarmer.org. You can visit us there and check out our different free trainings. Pioneer Mindset is the podcast. And so you can go check that out as well on all different streaming platforms, and really just get in touch. By all means, we'd love to have that conversation, and that'd be a great way for us to kind of kick things off.
Wonderful. Garrett, this has been a great conversation. We covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, actually one thing, and this is kind of taking a step back, but it might be on the mindset side of things, but I think it's always important to, kind of stress the importance of why we're talking, right? And what this all kind of comes down to. Now, a lot of things that I talk about are related between business and personal. That's all related, right? So when it comes to this specifically, talking about working with getting your line of credit renewed, even if you don't have a line of credit. And I was working with a gentleman the other day who just operates off of cash. He's got a pretty good cash flowing business. He said, well, I don't have to go and renew at a certain time. And I said, well, just imagine if there's an opportunity that comes up down the road, you want to make sure that you have everything kind of ready to go and ready to take advantage of that opportunity. So I'll say this: when it comes to working with the bank, and if most cases, if you're in ag, if you're in production agriculture, we're probably working with the bank. It's one of the most vital relationships that we have within our business, right? And so we're doing our best to maintain that. So to stress the importance of this and why we need to actually focus on this is it really kind of comes back to what you made the comment earlier about farming on. I kind of like to use that phrase of just farming on, and just continue to do what we love and enjoy. Well, if we want to do that, if we want to have the funding that we need to do that, we need to focus on the finances. We need to make sure that we're giving the bank everything he needs and more to paint that picture, to get our line of credit renewed, to make sure that we're securing that financing, not only for ourselves, not only for the next 12 months, but for our legacy, for everything that we're working towards. And then furthermore, as most of us are family operations, husbands and wives with children that we're, and I'm speaking to, like I'm myself, right? I got a young family, working with my wife. Every time I go into that banker's office and have that uncomfortable conversation, anything that I can do to make that better, so that way I don't, for some reason, carry that weight home towards the family, and making sure that we're just, we're looking out for our family as well. It's a trickle down effect. Everything on the business side really affects us on the personal side as well. So I guess that was kind of the last thing I really wanted to throw in there, kind of the importance of why these are things that we need to spend our time on, kind of back to because we're all numbers guys here, we like to focus on the numbers, why is this important? Well, we talk about the return on investment, back to the return on time as well, ROT. If we spend the time in the office, spend the time working on the numbers, put all these things in place, making sure that we are being proactive with the relationships with the lenders, getting our line of credit renewed. At the end of the day, above average customers at the bank get below average interest rates, right? So there are opportunities out there for us to get paid back for our time, for the amount of time that we put into our operation, into the finances, into the numbers, making the best decisions possible, right? So, and I just stress that right at the end, just because I feel like we need almost that extra driver to focus on things. And whatever that is for you, whatever it is for you, the listener, just try to find that, so that way we can do our due diligence focusing on the finances.
I love it. Those are great words to wrap up. Garrett, thank you so much for spending your time with us, sharing your wisdom. And also, I love to do a call out and a kind of like shine the light and thank guests when they're doing work like this to help farmers so that we can carry our legacy on. I just love when I find individuals that have the heart to help farmers. So thank you for the work that you do.
Yeah, and I appreciate it here, Tracy, because you do the same. I've listened to a lot of your episodes, had conversations from those episodes, met up with people just because I've listened to those. And so I think from podcasting, kind of both on that side of the mics, you just don't always see that sometimes. And so I appreciate all that you do and all that you've done for ag and for your listeners as well.
Oh, thank you. That warms my heart to hear that too. So thank you so much, Garrett. I really appreciate you. You guys in the audience, if you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, like it, share it, get it out there. And most importantly, check out Garrett and his work, his podcast, his coaching, and I'll include links to everything on our website. So thank you, Garrett. Thank you in the audience, and we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.